That's all.
Hey! Deja vu. Last time I did a Kirby game was because I was personally marathoning the entirety of Devil May Cry and wanted a breather. Here, well, it's still the same reason, wanting a respite, but it's because of the Danganronpa videos.
It's all fiction, created by the flashback light.
Can you really say you're not fictional now?
Even if your body is real, your identities, personalities, talents, and past are all fiction.
Alright, I gotta leave, okay?
John, we just started. Come on, man.
Listen, there's a lot to see in this life. Not wasting it here.
Please don't ask me when that series is coming out, as those 4 games might as well be my 4 labors. They'll come out when they do. So, to essentially make the wait for those videos not feel as long, I'll still be making content, though the games I'll be covering will undoubtedly be shorter. I've learned my lesson about making longer videos, he says, knowing that one of the videos he wants to do is going to be around the ballpark of the Cyan Danganronpa videos. It doesn't help that the game I'm alluding to is getting a remake, but we only got a trailer drop in July 2020, so who knows when that'll come out. Quite literally 2 days after wrapping up recording, we got another trailer drop alongside the New Year's announcements for 2021, though I'll believe the Tsukihime remake is real once it's released. Where was I?
Out of the way, you!
Oh yeah, Kirby. Let's talk about Kirby Air Ride. I have played a lot of racing games throughout my short life, a surprise to me seeing as it's not a genre I personally seek out. Correction, most of the racing games that I've played have been the Wacky Races styled kart racers, if any of you know what Wacky Races even is.
Sneaking along last is that mean machine with those double-dealing do-batters, Dick Dastardly and his sidekick.
I may not be physically old, but deep inside me, there's a hint of boomer. Watch out. I might spew on you. That's not to say that I haven't played actual racing games. I have. But man, my picks for those kinds of games have always been, let's just say, uninspired. Need for Speed? Midnight Club? Nah, give me NASCAR Racer 2 for Windows 95. That's what real racing game fans play.
What the fuck is this?
That's why I've always preferred games like Mario Kart or Action Girls Racing. I want to be able to actively screw up my fellow racers. Yet, out of all the Mario Karts or even other kart racers, there isn't exactly one I would call my favorite. Outside of Action Girls, a hidden masterpiece if I'm being frank, none of the Mario Kart games are my go-to. That's not to say I don't enjoy that series, Waluigi Pinball will always be an inside joke to my circle of friends, but I think kart-styled racers were perfected by a lovable pink puffball and his vast selection of stars. Okay, that might be a bit hyperbolic. Air Ride's history is a bit sinuous and confusing, as the game that came out in 2003 wasn't what was originally planned. For me to begin, I have to start in 1993, with the birth of Project Reality. To give some set dressing, the tumultuous years of 1988 to 1998 were the heyday of the Bit Wars. Everyone was racing to make their games look the prettiest, and while I may not have been around during that time, I, and by extension you, can see the ever-lingering ripples this time period created. Graphics have been pushed over gameplay for some developers. Throwing away my tangent, one of the key figures during this arms race was Jim Clark. James H. Clark, much like a lot of people who would go on to be a pioneer of the stars, didn't have a good life starting off. Having an alcoholic father and being mistreated during his stint in the Navy saw Clark learn to never trust anyone but himself. Though he never finished high school as he got his mother to sign permission for him to go to the Navy, Clark passed an equivalency exam allowing him to go on to college. Following a BS and MA in physics, Jim would study for a doctorate in computer science as he was interested in geometry pipelines. Not to stray away from the history lesson, but to give a little explanation, a geometry pipeline is what, in layman terms, creates computer graphics. At the same time, he was employed by Stanford University as an associate professor, where Jim saw himself involved in a project that would change his life. Working at Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, Jim and several of his classmates created the Geometry Engine, a state-of-the-art computer chip that could process 3D images in real time. This was meant to help engineers and other people of the sort to model without using real-world material. Seeing what he had created, Clark knew he had something on his hands. Wrapping up his PhD in '82, Clark, alongside a handful of associates and funding from an investor, founded Silicon Graphics. To say that SGI was successful would be an understatement. In between 1984 to 97, the annual revenue of SGI grew from 5.4 million to 3.7 billion, though this was at a cost. At the top of 84, Ed McCracken took the CEO position, leaving Jim with the role of chairman. This was due to Clark's languid leadership skills. All Jim thought he had to do was hire the brightest minds in computer science, and through, I don't know, mental osmosis, they'd be able to make his visions a reality. Turns out, people aren't mind readers. Making matters a bit worse, there was an air of hostility hanging around SGI like the fetid fragrance around a bloated body, stemming entirely from Clark's managerial style. There were three groups within SGI, the CEO Ed, those brought in by the investor, and the original team headed by Jim. It got so bad for Jim and his colleagues that they had to sell their shares of the company to Mayfield to keep day-to-day operations going. Despite floundering in the power structure of SGI, Jim did have his sights set towards the future. A grim one at that. Once the 90s arrived, one person in his business was on everyone's mind: Bill Gates and Microsoft.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates, chairman of Microsoft.
Foreseeing that home computers would soon outclass the bulky SGI workstations, Clark began pleading to McCracken to venture more into commercialization, an idea that was half met as Ed and his business partners would end up running Jim out of SGI for his ideas come 94. Thus began SGI's growth into the gaming market. Taking a modified version of SGI's MIPS R4000 CPU, Jim began shopping around for a partner in the industry, his first choice being Tom Kalinske, CEO of Sega's America wing. Tom was amazed by the capabilities of the chip, but because the American wing of Sega didn't handle console manufacturing, he had to call the Japanese wing. This wasn't a particularly easy action, as if you thought SGI was divided, Sega was reenacting the Sengoku period with their American and Japanese teams. See, the Genesis was mostly successful in America and Europe. Out of the 30.75 million Genesises, sold worldwide, only 3.58 million were sold in Japan. This was despite the fact that Sega was, and still is, an arcade giant in the country. On the flip side, around 18.25 million sales of the console were in America, Europe having around 8 mil. Resentment was on the Japanese arm's mind, especially since Sega Japan CEO Hayao Nakayama talked about how big-dicked the American part of the company was. Tom, in an interview with Sega 16 circa 2006, only noticed this until probably the later part of 1995, when one of my colleagues in Japan, who I knew well and had a good relationship with, said to me something to the effect of, "You don't understand how browbeaten and annoyed the Japanese executives here are because of your success." Sure enough, when the Japanese team arrived to see Jim's fancy new chip, they weren't impressed by it. Referring back to the interview, Tom says that they gave no reaction whatsoever. At the end of the meeting, they basically said that it was kind of interesting, but the chip was too big, in manufacturing terms, the throw-off rate would be too high, and they had lots of little technical things that they didn't like. The audio wasn't good enough, the frame rate wasn't quite good enough, as well as some other issues. Even after fixing the issues and calling back the Japanese team, who's joined by Nakayama for the second go-around, they still weren't impressed. This ended dealings between SGI and Sega, though Tom pointed Jim towards another gaming beacon at the time: Nintendo. Meeting with CEO Hiroshi Yamauchi, Jim and the head of Nintendo agreed upon a deal, kicking off Project Reality. The joint venture was meant to, as per the words of a Silicon Graphics newsletter, create Nintendo's next-generation gaming system and combine three-dimensional graphics of the quality seen in films such as Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 with high-fidelity sound and an interaction speed around 10 to 15 times faster than the current 16-bit games. What a load of bullshit. We all know how unoptimized the 64 was, but excuse me, I'm getting a bit too far away from where I need to be going. Following suit with the article, Nintendo made their announcement regarding Project Reality at the 1993 Shinshokai trade show. This is where I could go into the manufacturing details of Project Reality, but seeing as this is the history section for Air Ride, I'll jump to 1994 when Nintendo made another announcement. This new console would be called the Ultra 64. A dream team of developers, one being SGI, were picked to work on the console to finalize it for release, which would come June 1996 after a name change from Shigesato Itoi and a public reveal in 1995. Finally, I get to talk about Kirby. Among the first few games shown at the 1995 showcase was a sequel to Kirby's Dream Course dubbed Kirby Bowl 64. Dream Course, which was the latest Kirby game, was a success, so it'd be idiotic to not follow it up. Yet, fate had different plans, as by the time 96 rolled around, there was no bowl. Instead, the game had morphed into Kirby's Air Ride, which switched the focus of the game from golf ball to snowboarding. The game was still being developed for the Nintendo 64, but that's all I can really say. Much like Mother's 64, Kirby's Air Ride bit the dust and was cancelled, leaving Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards as the only Kirby game released on the 64. Or at least that version of the game, because come March 2003 at the annual DICE Summit in Las Vegas, Kirby Air Ride had resurfaced in the form of a video teaser to basically no fanfare. It didn't catch the eye of anyone attending, as not only was the teaser short, think seconds, not minutes, there was nothing to note. It just showed off the main concept of Air Ride, racing around and using Kirby's abilities. The following May, at E3, a playable demo was available, and while the reception to it was a bit better, it still wasn't turning eyes.
Unlike me, but that's because I'm a massive burgling scar tissue and undulating tendrils. It's why I don't go on dates.
That same year, 2003, Kirby Air Ride saw releases in Japan and America, but not Europe, who got it in 2004. Man, it would suck to be a European. PAL and later release dates? Miss me with that. You've probably noticed how I turboed out this Kirby section like I'm playing Despots, but there's a reason for that. Kirby Air Ride would be Masahiro Sakurai's last game with HAL Laboratory as he resigned from the company. This is all tied back to Kirby Bowl / the original Air Ride. Tension was being built up between HAL and Nintendo due to original Air Ride's release date being pushed back until its eventual cancellation. The reason why the team was struggling to get the game out was because of the Nintendo 64's quite poor hardware. Original Air Ride was meant to have 4-player multiplayer, but that was a pipe dream. Those who've played GoldenEye know what I mean. That game, on the actual system not emulated, struggles with 4-player deathmatch, so there was no way that original Air Ride could have had 4 players. Following the long sleep that Air Ride would have, Sakurai's team was instead mandated to work on the Crystal Shards, though note my phrasing. This is where I wish I could have done the Kirby 64 video over again so I could better it, but hey, you're watching me improve in real time. Sakurai would only do the voice work for DDD in Crystal Shards, his director position upended by Shinichi Shimomura. How much of the WIP game Sakurai saw is unknown, though a report compiled by HAL Laboratory Company Profile describes his first time playing Crystal as sentimental, perhaps displaying the fact that he had lost interest in the series. Even then, it had become clear that Sakurai was tiring of what we would later refer to as the sequelization of the industry. Sakurai hated that anytime he made a game, people would assume that a sequel would be following it. That, as well as HAL's restructuring, burnt him out, leading to Sakurai's resignation. Of course, Sakurai would end up later working for Nintendo as part of Sora Ltd., his own company. This is in thanks to Iwata, who managed to talk Sakurai off the figurative ledge. There's only one version to play, the original GameCube release, so I did my nautical duty and used a dolphin. Yeah, no, not even gonna bother with this tab. There is no story unless the opening cutscene is supposed to imply that after the Kirby Brigade bested Darkmind, they all went Warp Star racing. They also didn't invite DDD or Meta Knight, so both of them are a bit cross with the Rainbow Squad. I mean, I would be too, but that's neither here nor there. Just like the story. Perhaps the puffball rapscallions wanted to bogart all the fun for themselves, thus they purposely left out the King and Knight so they wouldn't have to share. It wouldn't be the first time Kirby has been the instigator of calamity. Shit, I just realized I'm looking way too deep into something that has no greater meaning. Next, I'll be trying to persuade the larger internet crowd and children how some kiddie film was actually eugenics propaganda, but unlike Thompson Priest, I'm not gonna tell you how to think. Now, excuse me. Please devote yourself to the lavish goddess known as Kiara Sessioin. I'm the high priest of the eclectic order of the transcendent heavens whole. We need more followers in our flock, and I won't take no for an answer. Starting off with an apt comparison, Kirby Air Ride's graphics are much akin to Super Smash Bros. Melee. Why is that? Both games use the same engine, Sizz Dolphin. While I only had that confirmed for me during my research for history, there was this nagging feeling that I had seen Kirby's model from somewhere before. In the back of my head, I was thinking of the opening cutscene for Melee, though for some reason I didn't put the pieces together until I completed the free run challenge for City Trial. This isn't a bad thing, mind you, as I think the character models look fine. Yeah, they've aged a little bit, mostly because this is GameCube hardware we're dealing with, but it's exceedingly difficult to ruin Kirby's look. Man, no matter what form he's in, he's still cute. Likewise, Meta Knight, DDD, and all the other inhabitants of Dreamland all look how they're supposed to. The air ride machines do run the gamut from neat looking to plain. Again, this isn't me complaining as well, it'd be puzzling to make the carts in a racer like this elaborate. The thing is, there are two over-the-top designs amongst the carts, Dragoon and Hydra, but they are still simplified so as to not be distracting. What honestly makes each star their own is the little details on each. Let me use Dragoon as an example as I've brought it up. When Dragoon is gliding, the wingtips on the back will start to transition to full color to completely white, this change acting as a timer for how long Dragoon has before it must come back down to Earth. While not every star has that sort of detail, each has its own character so as to stand out against the complete lineup. I don't think there's a single bad design for the stars outside of the Warp Star variants, but there's only two and I'd have to be real nitpicky to complain that a side grade of Warp Star looks like Warp Star. The levels, on the other hand, are more of a mixed bag. All the main air ride and top ride stages look great. There is a focus on the elements, like this was a Mario game, but each are recognizable and have something unique going on. Beanstalk Park has its massive Ferris wheel, Magma Flows has the giant globe of rails, and Machine Passage has mysterious science experiments. Yeah, they're there, looking at you as if to announce their intention. This is why those hideous meme edits of Kirby, like the one where he has actual feet, don't terrify me, as it's not like the Kirby series is trying to masquerade its horror. It's always been there. Waiting. And watching. Just like knockoff Mother Brain here. For as good as the regular tracks are, the City Trial City looks uninspired. I get that the world that Kirby is racing through is quite simple in design, but there's a charm to it. All the buildings in the city look so characterless that it feels like the Eds created it to rip people off. The attention to detail is still there as there are flowers on the highest points of the city, but the buildings look like the 3D modeling equivalent of cardboard. I'm surprised any of them are left standing after the destruction that befalls the city, or maybe that's the point. When's the first time a city ever appeared in Kirby? To my recollection, it was 64 with Shiver Star, also known as Earth. Is Kirby trying to fuck? There I go again. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the city is as flat as a Smash player's brain. Offsetting the boring city and enhancing the air ride courses is the music. Composed by Melee alumni Hirokazu Ando, Shogo Sakai, and Tadashi Ikegami, as well as Akira Miyagawa and Jun Ishikawa, Air Ride's music shouldn't go this hard. It does, however, with a sampling ranging from orchestral, such as Beanstalk Park, to techno, Machine Passage, to even freeform jazz with the tag theme? Look, I don't know music genres, all I know is that this soundtrack is a banger, with Checker Knights and Legendary Air Ride Machine being the top two tracks in the listing. Both are highly triumphant, with Checker Knights being inspired by Jacques Offenbach's Orpheus in the Underworld. I totally knew that, I didn't struggle for around 30 minutes trying to remember what the can was. Due to its speedy tempo and usage of cymbals, while Legendary Air Ride Machine is more generalized, but still packs an aural punch, much like the sound effects. From Kirby's trademark Inhale to the various engine noises, Air Ride has a good soundscape, though there is some mixing issues when things get too hectic. It's hard to complain about Kirby's sound library, which is what Air Ride uses. If I may go back to graphics as I overlooked something, the UI is another element that is a bag of Chex Mix. Some of the in-game elements are great, like the speedometer that cracks when Kirby runs out of health, but the damage portraits and fellow racer indicators are the black rye chip of the bag. Stale and prosaic. Same metaphor can be used for the menus, which lack any pizzazz. Remember, this is a Kirby game we are talking about, a franchise well known for cutesy or interesting UIs. Still, my spike can only hang on to so much, as the music, cart, and track designs more than capably cover the weaker aspects of the presentation. Kirby Air Ride is a 4-player kart racer with a multitude of modes. To keep this structured, I'll cover the general control scheme before delving into the different gameplay options and carts. Kirby is always naturally moving. This isn't like an actual racing game or a kart game. The player doesn't have to hold down a button to accelerate. The control stick still turns left or right depending on the direction it is moved. Substituting the accelerate button, the A button or the triggers cause Kirby to stop. This isn't an immediate stop unless the button is held down for a long time. Instead, it's a mixture of a handbrake and boost. There will be turns in each of the courses, so going into them at too high of a speed is not advisable. That's why you use the handbrake to not only get through the turn, but to keep up speed. There is a mastery to this mechanic, however, because if the handbrake is held down long enough, a gauge on the speedometer will build up, and once it's full, Kirby will boost when the handbrake button is let go of. This whole system acts like how drifting works in other racing games or Mario Kart, just with a bit more difficulty. Is it better to just power through a curve without the boost, or press your luck and attempt to get a full charge out of it? Holding onto the hand boost does kill Kirby's speed over time, and having a full charge for too long empties it out, forcing the player to recharge the boost. Adding to the factors that need to be juggled, each star handles charging differently, so sometimes getting a boost might not even be worth it. It's up to the player to decide how to take a turn, balancing what the other racers are doing, what star they're using, and what is past the turn. There might be a singular turn, or it might be a series. Adding to the boost mechanic is gliding. Warp stars aren't just ground-based vehicles, they are capable of limited flight. Whenever Kirby, or DDD and Meta Knight as they are both unlockable characters, ride over a ramp, they will start to glide. How long they glide is dependent on a few factors, two major ones being Kart type and skill. I'll get the easy part of this out of the way first. Not all stars are created equal. Some are slower on the ground but faster in the air and vice versa. A wheelie bike will stay in the air for considerably less time than, say, Jetstar. Skill, meanwhile, is a bit trickier to explain. When in the air, up on the control stick will send the warp star down, while down will send it up. Left and right still turn, but for right now I want to focus on up and down. Gliding with a star is adjusting holding up and down at the right times to go the furthest distance. Completely holding down will force Kirby to stall, killing any speed he had and cause him to crash land. Doing the opposite will end the glide early and will still cause a crash land. Keeping Kirby level is key, not only to not crashing, as that can kill a lead advantage since Kirby has to reorient himself when he eats dirt, but to also keep up speed. For some stars, gliding is much faster than being on the ground, so staying in the air for as long as possible is the goal. Much like with hand boosting, gliding has its own dichotomy of decision making. Gliding is useful for long straightaways, but not turns. Not every turn, I should say. For wider turns, a gliding star can make it through, but for sharper ones, it is better to go back down to the ground. Determining this is all up to the player. Also up to the players deciding whether to land naturally or use the handbrake land. Holding the handbrake while in the air forces Kirby immediately to the ground at the cost of some of his speed. However, this allows Kirby to properly take a sharp turn if one is coming up. Using the brake land can lead to gaining more speed if Kirby lands on a boost pad, which can then feed into a technique I call bounce gliding. Not every star is able to perform this technique, as the ones designated towards gliding have an easier time doing it. For my example, both text and video-wise, I'll be using Wingstar. Properly maintaining a glide doesn't mean it will last indefinitely. As mentioned before, even Dragoon doesn't fly forever. However, a star's glide time is refreshed whenever it touches the ground. It doesn't have to be for a long period of time, just one tap on the ground refills glide time. Gliding stars tend to pull towards the sky when they reach a high enough speed, so when the player goes to land with one of these stars, they typically bounce back up into the air. Taking advantage of this is one of the key components when using glide-type stars. It's what allows them to compete with ground-type stars, which have better acceleration and handling, but have to deal with the hand boost mechanic much more. That's not even getting into item placement, rails, boost pads, or shortcuts. Items I'll talk about last due to it being connected to Kirby's copy mechanic, so I'll move on to rails. Whenever Kirby runs into a rail, he will start riding on it, giving a boost of speed and automating his movement. Whether this is a good or bad thing is dependent on track and star type, as sometimes it's better to let the rail take Kirby along for an increase in speed. Boosts dot the tracks just like rails do, though how they function is based on what star the player is using. Almost all stars levitate off the ground, meaning to use a boost, the player has to use the handbrake to force the star earthbound. Just a slight tap on air, the triggers will get the boost to activate. Land-based stars, however, like the wheelie series, don't have to tap the brake as they are already on the ground. Unlike rails, boosts don't correct Kirby's trajectory, so it is possible to go careening into a wall and lose all the speed given by it. Shortcuts are self-explanatory. Sometimes a switch needs to be flicked, other times a section of the level can be glided over. Items are handled differently in Air Ride. As opposed to item boxes a la Mario Kart, Kirby has to swallow his enemies on the track to gain their abilities. Kirby doesn't automatically do this, instead the player has to hit the handbrake button when near an enemy. What ability Kirby gets is based on the type of enemy. Pufferfish gives Spike, Knights gives Sword, and so forth and so on. How an ability operates is determined by what it is. Some work without the player's input like sword, mic, and wheel, while others require the player to either hit the handbrake button or rock the control stick back and forth. Abilities last for a short period of time before they run out, but even without an ability, Kirby isn't defenseless. Hitting the control stick left and right forces Kirby to do a spin attack which can hit multiple times. Kirby has access to this attack even with an ability, though it does pitiful damage and only really works as an enemy clear or a last resort attack. This is different in Top Ride, however, and speaking of game modes, there are 3 to choose from: Air Ride, Top Ride, and City Trial. Air Ride is the go-to for plain old simple racing in Kirby Air Ride. There are 8 tracks to choose from, 9 if we count the unlockable Nebula Belt track, and 3 race types: Air Ride, Time Attack, and Free Run. Air Ride is the standard racing mode where you and your buddies or the AI race against each other. Most tracks are rather large, so lap amount is usually around 2 to 3, though many of the settings for Air Ride can be changed. Tangent, this applies to each game mode. Lap amount can be tweaked, health bars can be added, and tailgate strength can be modified. Normally, health bars aren't in Air Ride, meaning the penalty for getting hit is losing speed. When that option is put on, however, Air Ride becomes F-Zero, as just like in that game, Kirby can die pretty quickly. Only a few abilities have a grace period when getting hit by them, like Bomb. Air Ride machines don't have too much health either, and when I mean die, Kirby is retired for the race, no respawning. Time Attack is a 3-lap run through any course selected, while Free Run is all about how fast a player can race through a track, time resetting each time they do a lap. Now, you're probably wondering why there isn't much to choose from when first starting off the game. That's because everything in Air Ride is locked off by challenges. All the stars, Nebula Belt, music, and even the ending are unlocked via completing a challenge checklist. There are 120 challenges for Air Ride, some being lackadaisically easy, such as gliding over the finish line while in first, to harder than me at a Monster Girl convention. Finish Checker Nights under 4 minutes in Time Attack? Well, you better get damn good at the racing mechanics then. Staying on the challenges, each game mode has their own list and ending, meaning to see all 3 endings, a player has to complete 360 challenges of varying difficulty. Granted, to get all the stars in Air Ride only requires about 18 challenges being finished, so if you want to just aim for those, you can. The next game mode is Top Ride, where instead of being behind Kirby while he's racing, everyone playing has a top-down view of the entire racetrack. Track size in Top Ride is small, thus the standard lap limit is 5 to 6 laps. Unlike in Air Ride, where there is a bountiful amount of stars, there are only 2 stars in Top Ride, Free and Steer. Using Free means wherever the control stick is pointing is where Kirby will go. Steer Star, on the other hand, makes the player hold left and right on the stick to steer that direction. I'll be honest, Top Ride is my least favorite game mode solely because of the top-down view, making it confusing to control the stars. Instead of swallowing enemies, items are dropped onto the track, which I also think hurts Top Ride because there's no challenge or fun in acquiring items unlike an Air Ride or City Trial. The challenges are also quite boring. Do 100 laps on a specific racetrack? What is this, the Coca-Cola 600? These aren't consecutive laps, as the game keeps tallying how many laps you've done on each track and how many times you've completed a game mode, but damn, that's a lot. Top Ride just lacks many of the mechanics used in Air Ride and City Trial, and thus I don't have much good to say about it. Top Ride has the same game modes as Air Ride, Time Attack, and Free Run, but do I care to fulfill boring challenges in a game type that really doesn't have anything to unlock? The answer to that is no. No, I do not. The last, and my favorite of the game modes, is City Trial. In it, all players must scavenge around a large city map to acquire stat increases for their Air Ride machine before time runs up. Once that happens, each player must use their customized machine to complete a challenge. Each player starts off on a level playing field as everyone starts on Compact Star, but different Air Ride machines can be found throughout the city. This is where the dismount mechanic is used. By holding back on the control stick and holding down the handbrake, Kirby will get off his machine, allowing him to switch. On-foot movement with Kirby is basic, as we're going off of Crystal Shard's rules when it comes to the amount of hover jumps Kirby has. Not like you want to be on foot for a long period of time at all, because if time ends when a player is off their machine, they have to use Compact Star for the challenge. Health bars are a staple in City Trial, however, unlike an Air Ride, Kirby doesn't die when it reaches 0. Instead, his Air Ride machine blows up and he has to find a new one. Now, why would you want to attack other players? To steal their stat bonuses. Whenever a player receives damage, there is a chance that they will lose a stat upgrade. Anyone can grab a freed stat item, so that in turn becomes a race. However, that isn't the only way to get upgrades, as they spawn all throughout the city. They might be freely floating in the ether or locked up in boxes. Yes, boxes also spawn in, and they come in 3 types: blue, green, and red. Blue boxes contain stat items such as upgrades and downgrades. It's imperative to not grab downgrades unless a certain stat has been increased too far. Keep an eye on top speed for some stars. Like with upgrades, downgrades also spawn outside of boxes. The core stats are health, offense, defense, top speed, turn, charge, and weight. These are self-explanatory, though offense not only increases the amount of damage that Kirby's spin and ram does, but the damage of copy abilities and items as well. God help you if a max offense player flings a bomb or Gordo in your vicinity. Green boxes contain temporary power-ups like invincibility, automatic spinning, or health items. These too spawn outside of boxes. Red boxes house either copy abilities or legendary air ride machine pieces. While copy abilities spawn outside of boxes, and there even is a copy wheel in the city in case a player wants to test their luck or is trying to clear a challenge, legendary pieces only spawn in red boxes. There are 2 legendary air ride machines / stars, Dragoon and Hydra. Typically, only one set of parts will spawn in the city, though I do think both machines can be in play during the trial. Both Dragoon and Hydra need 3 pieces to be complete, and once that happens, whoever did so will have their current star replaced. You can still get off of Dragoon and Hydra, but their stat distributions are head and shoulders above the other stars. However, sometimes the legendary air ride machines won't be great for the end trial challenge. Throughout the trial, city events might happen, such as meteors striking the city or Dynablade showing up. Not only do these situations act as obstacles, stat upgrades can also be earned. Take Dynablade for example. Sure, everyone can avoid her, but she can be damaged by having a player glide into her head. She drops upgrades and even the coveted all item, which increases each stat by 1. At the end of the trial, a challenge is played, though which one is random unless tweaked in the settings or if the game gave a premonition. I don't know if these are Tezuka% accurate, but if the game says it sees a long road, the challenge is probably a drag race. Outside the main city trial mode, there is a free run where the player can test out each star in Stadium, which are just the challenges at the end of city trial. A challenge must first be played within city trial to unlock it for Stadium, and most of the checklist challenges for city trial involve completing a stipulation for a trial challenge. Some require a certain time and star used for a specific drag race, while others are killing a certain amount of enemies in a melee. All that really gets unlocked for city trial is music and being able to use Dragoon and Hydra in free run, which is a tad weak. Especially since certain checklist challenges incentivize using city trial to make them easier. Each checklist has a limited amount of free spots which are earned from certain challenges. These free spots automatically complete a challenge even if the player hasn't actually accomplished it. There are 20 stars / air ride machines in Kirby Air Ride, each with their own functionality and stat distribution. Some stars have better flight abilities like Warp, Shadow, and Jet Star, while others like to keep it to the ground, the Wheelie series or Bulk Star. I'm not going to talk about the finer details of each star since there are so many, and 2 of them are even different characters, and that's not even going into the special mechanics of some like Rocket or Wagon Star. There is enough for me to be safe in the opinion that there is something for everyone. I will say, however, that balance is a bit over the place, as I fail to see why anyone would use Rocket Star, more so in Air Ride than City Trial. There's probably people who know how to clear the time challenge with it on Checker Nights, but me and the AI both struggle with it. Speaking of AI, it's cookie cutter racing AI. There's always one that is the clear leader of the group and can and will snipe you at the end of the race while the other 2 struggle to even keep up. It's not bad, but the quality of the AI can be raised and lowered depending on what checklist challenge is being done. Before I move on to the gameplay parts that I really enjoy, I want to spooge about the music again. I don't think there is a singular bad track in this game. All the music fits thematically and it's exactly what should be in a racing game. It's bombastic, energetic, and gets me in the mood to play Air Ride. Of course, my favorite track is Checkered Nights, and not just because I can pretend to know about classic music when talking about it. Seriously, I struggled for 30 minutes to remember what the can was. I think Checkered Nights is the epitome of Air Ride's track listing. It has an energetic horn and cymbal section that pumps me up to race through Checkered Nights as fast as possible, but it also has a little interlude that acts as a breather. I could talk about the music in Air Ride for all day, as there's a lot to like about this soundtrack. There's Machine Passage and Nebula Belt, which are techno arrangements, but both still keep the racing feel, and with Nebula, it's like a robot orchestra is playing the track.
Okay, this is Rolf the Wolf saying thanks for using the show selector.
How about Celestial Valley's Western-inspired ditty, which is how I imagine traveling down a roaring rapid would sound like. That's not even getting into the retro unlockable tracks, which are just the tracks from Superstar ported over with no enhancements. Before I go on for too long talking about the music, I'll switch over to gameplay, as like I said in the opening, this might be my favorite kart racer ever. The reason for why that is lies within the balance of skill and shenanigans. My problems with other kart racers is that the balance is either non-existent or is skewed too far to one side. I'll use Mario Kart and Crash Team Racing as my examples. I won't deny that there is some skill involved in Mario Kart, as you have to at least turn on your brain to play it, but there's nothing like getting your skill rewarded with a blue shell to the face. I don't mind balance mechanics in party games, as I'm probably one of the few people who doesn't mind Rage and Smash Ultimate, but there is little the blue shell does for the person in last. It's just a straight up punishment for the person in first for being in first. This isn't like the person in second landing a skillful shot with a green shell or banana peel, or even using a red shell, as those items at least help the player in second get to first. On the flip side, Crash Team Racing is more about skillful driving, but that's at the cost of the party aspect. Items play less of a factor overall, as it's more about understanding how drifting works, as repeated drifting can give the player a pretty hefty speed boost and map layout. It says a lot that the bosses and team are mostly testing the player's actual driving capabilities, which to me just begs the question why items are even a thing in Team. Yeah, in a full lobby there is chaos, but it all comes down to understanding the drift. That's where I think Kirby Air Ride gets it right. Air Ride is definitely on the more skillful side of play, as getting used to the handbrake system does take a little bit of time. However, it isn't as stringent as Team's drift mechanic. Utterly botching a handbrake boost or drift will kill speed, but there's a multitude of other factors and mechanics that ease the failure. It's why I like gliding so much in the game. Gliding is a challenge in of itself, as it requires understanding of course layout to perform bounce glides, but not engaging with it doesn't mean the player is going to have a bad time. This is why I think that Machine Passage is the best track in the game. The entire level is a training ground for practicing both mechanics, as not only are there a multitude of turns of varying degree, there's a lot of spots to glide from. My footage from doing its free run challenge I think showcases this well. It also shows off how connected the handbrake mechanics are to the gliding mechanics. Without understanding both, I wouldn't be able to complete some of the checklist challenges, but only having a slight grasp on how they work isn't as detrimental as it would be in Team. There's also the different stars and how they factor in. A star might not be great for gliding, but maybe it has better ground speed or turning, thus making handbraking easier. In that same breath, a gliding star will definitely be faster in the air, matching or even surpassing land-based stars, but that means handbraking will be a bit harder. A land star could easily overtake a gliding one if the glider doesn't properly handbrake turns. Perhaps my favorite part of this is how enemies work. Not only are they items, but also a means to get a speed boost. Whenever the player kills an enemy, they get a tiny speed boost, thus killing whole swaths of enemies provides a large boost. Not only are you screwing over the other racers by taking abilities away from them, you're also outracing them. It's a twofold feature that helps elevate the items to the same role as the handbrake and gliding mechanics. Granted, that's only for Air Ride, as City Trial is a free-for-all where skill doesn't even matter. It is perhaps my favorite game mode in any racing game ever, solely because I like the scavenger aspect of it. You see the fruits of your labor in the ending challenge when a drag race gets completed in 11 seconds. City Trial is also where I think the expansive star roster gets to shine. Who knows what ending challenge will appear, so the dummy who picked Rocket Star might have the edge. Still, my favorite one that shows up is versus DDD, all because I get to smack the crap out of him, and doing it fast enough unlocks him for City Trial free run. There is a lot I could say about Top Ride. It's interesting for an idea, but so is live streaming the heat death of the universe. That's a roundabout way of me saying Top Ride is boring. I'll start with the machines, as that is honestly where I have the most issues. The fact that there are only 2 for Top Ride is lackluster. Why would I ever pick a game mode that only has 2 machines with bland gimmicks over one that has damn near 20 machines, each with their own riding style? What doesn't help the 2 Top Ride machines is that both, at least to me, don't play well with the top-down view. I don't know if my brain is wired differently or I'm just plain dumb, but for the life of me, I can't use Freestar without going the completely wrong direction most of the race, and while using Steer Star is better, what is there to look forward to in Top Ride? None of the mechanics that show up in Air Ride or City Trial are used, or if they do, they are severely gimped. Top Ride does have handbrake boosting, but its role in winning races is severely diminished. I can easily take a turn in Top Ride without the aid of a handbrake or boost. Gliding isn't even a factor within Top Right, so there goes bounce gliding. What makes matters even worse is that the checklist for Top Right is mostly pointless. There are music unlocks, but unless you want to look up a guide for the checklist, I wouldn't bother. It doesn't help that some of the challenges are dreadfully dull. I may have memed on the 100 laps, but each racetrack has that challenge. That means to complete about 8 challenges, I would have to do around 800 laps, 100 for each track. That is the definition of tedium. And while I've already spoken about the items, it's bizarre that I'm picking up items as Kirby. You know, the character that gains abilities by swallowing up enemies? This is well and fully nitpicky, but I think having enemies on Top Right would at least add some form of fun to it. I may not personally enjoy the game mode, but I can see potential for it. But with how bare bones Top Right is, I have to ask why was it included. I think the other big issue I have is with some of the challenges. For the air ride ones, it's mostly the time trials, mainly because it feels as if certain ones have specific stars in mind. I'm mostly talking about 4-minute checker nights. I struggled to use Wingstar for the map, yet when I unlocked Wheelie Bike, I came extremely close to fulfilling it. I don't know if that's because of Wheelie Bike's stats or me taking advantage of the speed boost gained from killing enemies, or both. A challenge that is hard with one machine might be easy with another, which means unlocking machines should be the first port of action, but those challenges aren't listed unless a challenge next to it has been finished on the checklist. This issue is separate from the other time trial problem I have, and that's when the game asks the player to complete a lap or track with a specific time on a set machine. There's a reason I brought up Rocket Star, as any challenge involving that piece of shit might as well ask me to use a free spot. City Trial isn't free of this either, but it's made worse because some drag race checklist challenges force the player to play City Trial. Playing City Trial isn't the problem, it's that what ending challenge is picked is random. There is an option to set what City Trial's ending challenge will be, but there are 4 drag races, so I have to hope the game wants to give me Drag Race 2 instead of 1. I also have to find the specific star the challenge lists, so if I can't find, say, Wagon Star, I just wasted my time. There's no way to track checklist challenges either, which sucks when doing the bust this machine with that one type challenges. I don't have a lot of problems with City Trial, it's my favorite game mode, but some of the city events can be a tad annoying. Anytime heavy fog shows up, I just roll my eyes. This event exists to waste my time. Supercharged machines is almost as bad, but there is a smidgen of hilarity to be had when trying to collect items when going the speed that rabbits have sex at. I fully recommend Kirby Air Ride. It's a fun little party racer that has a bit of depth to it for those who want to master their air ride machines. There are minor gripes that I have with it, like Top Right and some of the challenges, but those are overall minor issues. Easiest way to play is through Dolphin, where you can use net play to have 4-player carnage.